Oh, Kemmer the Hashif.
Cymata, Belat Cymata Bain.
And Cymata. I guess chain 10 of a horse.
Smisha Michael Linkletter.
Riva. I guess Kawasa how.
Sana Elena Frinta Etcherstami, Vahus, a Haminisha Furachana Antigonish, Sabhal Mòr Ostaig.
I guess Phyllis I could chase one you hack.
Sheikh, Smisha Michael Mach Rai, Ich Gerald, Ich Lloyd, Ich Edgar, Ich Ian, Ich Heurish, Ich Ian, a Hain, a Ruckig, Snellen and Archives in Chandui.
I guess Kemmer the Hoodoo Hours at the Gaelic.
Oh, Vahus, Jaime and Colaisde na Gaelic. The Revami, Gina Shavami. Coig playing the Giagash. I guess Fami on the Colan Peeb on the summer side. I guess Hajin Ola and Colaisde. And I gave it I guess a shin, Vami a gal Phoebe, Achane now, Vami on the class Gaelic Katrina Parsons. So, shin a head class Gaelic unto Romy.
I see that. I guess a wel Gaelic I can show at it.
Give me Ostenach na Gael. Na Gael. Reist je kero Gaelic ek Sheen Jennifer, she nicht gefaal a bintje, ach gebanje roi.
Well, I will at missile here, have a question gewel.
Getaraf, sheik, ja. Ja, she kjolet nam hennever, sheik. De Norken, I guess, bavish die kloich out necklace Gidani.
I guess the next sound found Eknakal Gaelic. What is your name?
I'm Michael Linkletter.
And where are you from and where were you brought up?
I'm from PEI. I was born and raised there, just west of Summerside in a little community called Linkletter, named after my ancestors who settled there. But I live now here in Antigonish.
Right. And can you tell us a bit of your genealogy?
Sure. So as I was saying, in Gaelic, my people originated in the Orkney Islands in the north of Scotland. They came over to North America in, I believe the year was, it was in the mid to late 1700s. I can't know the exact year they came over, but they settled in the area now is the Greenwich area of Connecticut. And then during the American Revolution, one brother stayed in the United States. We call that the Rebel branch in my family. And then the Loyalist branch came up and got a land grant in PEI. And that land grant eventually became called Linkletter after that first ancestor of mine who settled there. George Linkletter was his name. And that was in 1784.
Wow.
Yeah.
They came early.
They did.
They
yes.
did.
Yeah. They didn't have Gaelic. Being from the Orkneys, they didn't speak Gaelic. But there is one branch of my family would be a fellow, would it be my great-grandfather. He married a woman whose name was Minnie MacPhail. She was brought up in a Maclean household. And my grandfather said that they all spoke Gaelic in that household. But Minnie didn't speak it. She said that the old people in the house used it as a secret language, as we all hear of sometimes, that she was never taught the language. But that's my closest connection that I know of to Gaelic. But I became interested in it as a teenager because I was interested in piping. And I joined a pipe band from Summerside. And then I came over to the Gaelic College when I was about 15 with the band. And that was my first connection with Gaelic, with Katrina Parsons.
Yes. In her Gaelic class.
In her Gaelic class, as part of the college piping, the Gaelic College in St Anne's with their piping classes. So we also had one class a day in Gaelic.
So I asked you as well if your family had spoken any Gaelic, and
Yeah, unfortunately, no Gaelic in my family. Yeah,
but they liked the music.
I did like the music. Yeah. Well, yeah, I was saying my grandmother was a musician in the church, so we grew up. She would play organ in the church on Sundays, and I played the trumpet and bagpipes, and so I would join her in church on Sundays and things. But beyond that, of course, there was always music in the family. We were always, any types of family gatherings, we would always be singing and playing music. And she also played the fiddle later on in life. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's good. So, were there concerts in the area when you were growing up in PEI? Scottish type concerts?
In my area, not so much. In Summerside, sometimes we would see some events and things happening. But when I got older, and then they actually built their own college of piping in Summerside, we put on summer concerts, and they were put on largely for tourists. But I would take part in those very often. Yeah.
And now there's a festival each year in PEI, the Rollo Bay Festival.
The Rollo Bay Fiddle Festival, yes. Yes, it is supposed to be very good.
Did you hear any Gaelic singers when you were growing up in PEI?
No, unfortunately.
So when you came over here to Nova Scotia,
yes.
That's
when my first exposure to Gaelic singing was at the Gaelic College when I was a teenager, yeah.
And did you see a milling frolic at that time?
Yes, I seem to recall that there were some milling frolics. Yeah, I think they probably put one on in the classroom would be my first exposure to it. I thought it was very interesting. And, of course, I fell in love with the language. Hearing it sung, I think, probably for the first time, and hearing people sing it there, yeah.
So can you tell us a bit now about your educational journey from high school to university to post-grad?
Sure. I after finishing high school in Summerside, I came over to St X to do Celtic Studies. My first degree, I did 2 BAs. My first degree was in Celtic Studies. My second degree was in history. And as part of that, my history thesis was looking at the history of the Gaelic-speaking community in PEI. And then I went from there to Harvard University, where I did my master's and my PhD in the Celtic Languages and Literatures department, as they call it down there. And I finished that formally in 2006.
So, were you familiar with Charles Dunn at Harvard University?
I did. I met with Charles a few times. Yes. And I was looking for a thesis topic, what I wanted to write my PhD thesis on, and I went to visit him at his house. We had a great chat, and he pointed me to a collection of materials in the Public Archives of Nova Scotia in Halifax at the time, and he thought that I might be interested in them. These were the papers that belonged to Alexander Maclean Sinclair. And so I made a research trip up and visited Ken Nilsson, who was in the department at the time, and Sister Margaret, who was still living in the area, and Sister Margaret MacDonald, exactly. And she was very keen on putting me onto those materials as well, and so she gave me some copies of some things that she had along those lines, and I visited the public archives and was blown away by the amount of material that they had there, boxes and boxes of letters and other things. John Maclean, the Bard Maclean's manuscripts, everything there, and it was the start of my PhD thesis topic. So I had a number of years of interesting research that I did in the archives at that point. So that was.
So what year was that?
That I came out. That was around 2000.
Around 2000.
Yeah,
okay.
For that research trip, and then in 2001, I came up to teach for the first time. I was still working on my PhD, but basically I had finished everything except for the thesis, and there was a new position that was announced here in this new Ben Alder Chair of Celtic Studies that was funded by a grant to the university by someone who was in Scotland, who was originally of Swiss background, and he donated money to the university to establish that chair, and so I was the first holder of the chair back then, and taught in that for a year, and then taught part-time thereafter for a few years while I was trying to finish up my PhD thesis. And then in 2006 I finished my PhD thesis. Katrina Parsons, who was on staff then in faculty, she retired, and so a position opened up, and I got on full-time back then. And so I've been here full-time ever since 2007. Yeah.
Well, it must be a good fit for you, because there's a lot of good information here.
Absolutely, yeah. And in the room that we're in, the Special Collections is a wonderful resource that we have. It's research caliber, I always say. So we have a master's program in Celtic Studies at the department here at St FX, and we have 4 students in that program this year. So that's the most I think we've ever had at one time for the master's program. And one of the reasons we can have such a program is because we've got such a great resource here. We're the only Master of Arts at St FX. So yeah.
And the groundwork was laid here for
absolutely,
such a thing.
Absolutely.
You must have been impressed with the folklore collection online, the Gael Stream. The
Gael Stream, yes. Yes, all the groundwork. They're established by, actually, with the passing of Alan J. McEachin, he with his all the work that he did in getting the endowed chair in 1984, I think it was 1983 or 4. It's called the Sister Saint Veronica Chair in Gaelic Studies, which I now hold, and which Ken Nicholson was the first holder. None of that I think would have happened without the intervention, I think, of Alan J. and Sister Margaret, and the Antigonish Highland Society was an important part of all of that in getting that established here at St FX.
Great that they had the foresight to see such a need to
absolutely
gather.
Yes, and thank goodness that they did, because without that funding there and the establishing of the chair, and without the later on the funding of the Ben Alder chair, largely thanks to Father Vern Boudelier and the help that he gave in getting that established, we would be in a little bit more thin ice, I think, at the university, because with cutbacks and the concern they have with numbers and all of those types of things. But the Gaelic Folklore Project was one of the things that was an important development. The Cape Breton Gaelic Folklore Project, which was an important development that came out in the early 1980s, again with the funding from multiculturalism, like the Sister Saint Veronica Chair, with the help of Alan J. and Sister Margaret, and then hiring of John Shaw to do the actual collecting, and it's resulted in an amazing resource that we have. Yeah. Yes.
So I guess you just listed off a few names there. I'm sure that they were quite the inspiration to you as well.
Absolutely, certainly Sister Margaret and all the people in the department in the early days when I was a student here, and especially Ken Nicholson was always an important mentor in my earlier days, especially as a student, and giving advice on where to go to do certain things that I wanted to do to go on. Yes, and then of course Katrina Parsons from the time when I was even a teenager and learning Gaelic from her, and Sister Margaret always helped out, pointing me to resources. They're very encouraging, yes, all of them, yeah.
That's great.
So
you also studied abroad in Gaelic language and culture at Sabhal Mòr Ostaig.
Yes, we at the university there was I think it was some of the work that Katrina Parsons had done back in 95 and in trying to get a fundraising concert together to send a student to study Gaelic in an immersion environment at Sabhal Mòr Ostaig in the summer. And 1995 was the first year of that, and I won I was a student here at the time, and I won the scholarship that year. And then ever since then, the students have put on a concert almost every year to help fundraise for that, and to send one of their own to the Sabhal Mòr Ostaig. And so that's still going on. So it's a nice heritage legacy that we have from those times. Yeah, so I went to Sabhal Mòr Ostaig in the summer months a couple of times after that too. And when I was a student at Harvard, I went over to do some immersion courses with Sabhal Mòr. Yeah. Back when I was a student here, they used to do Gaelic days and Gaelic workshops regularly, once a term at least. And Ken Nicholson used to hire some people from the local community to come and give the workshops, which is Jim Watson was always a great leader of the workshops, and always thoroughly enjoyed his classes. And some of these Gaelic days that we would have, a number of, always encouraged the native speakers to come to those. And say one person who came to almost every event we would have is Sandy Cameron from Mabu. And he was always a hoot, and he was a good time. He always very quick to befriend the students, and yeah.
And he liked to tell stories.
He loved to tell stories, yeah.
And he was the fiddler or violin player as well.
Right, yeah. And I remember him fondly, yeah.
Yes. So can you talk now about some of the projects that you worked on yourself? Some field work you might have done, or collections you were involved in, and stories connected with the field work that stand out in your life.
Oh, I just remember some of the field work I've done. I remember collecting. One of the kind of examples I suppose stands out in my mind is going to visit Reverend Donald Nicholson, actually in PEI, was one of the last people on the island with a bit of Gaelic, at least. He had some Gaelic. And I visited him in the late 90s, and it was a combination of a very interesting experience, but also kind of very sad in a way, because he'd been starved of Gaelic for so many years. In a way, he talked about how he grew up in a Gaelic-speaking household. He had a Gaelic Bible that he had next to him, and it was well thumbed. He obviously read it a lot. And he could understand it much better than he could speak it. And when I was trying to get him to record some songs and expressions and things, it was always very halting. He was getting quite old at the point that I saw him, and I'd heard some recordings that other people had made when he was younger, and he was a bit more quick to recall the Gaelic. But he said, his older brother and his parents would all just speak Gaelic in the house all the time. But by the time he came along, it was more of a combination, and he kind of had to kind of almost force them to speak Gaelic to him. But he was a very interesting man. Yeah.
Nice to have met him.
Yes, I was really happy to have met him.
And what were his roots? How would you describe his was of the Gaelic?
His people came from the Isle of Skye area, actually from Rossay, I believe. It was from the Isle of Rossay, just next to Skye, north of Skye. So that was very much his background. He had some snippets of little songs and things, I think, that were composed on the island, I recall. But I just remember thinking that we're just... John Shaw collected him too, and he did a project for the Institute of Island Studies, and he had visited the Reverend Nicholson as part of that as well. So it just left an impression on me as just missing kind of the heyday of Gaelic culture on PEI, and it would have been nice to have had recording equipment there in its heyday to get it to record it.
So you could compare his dialect to other people here in Nova Scotia.
Well, he didn't have enough Gaelic, I don't think, to do a good comparison of that. So I couldn't really comment on that. It would be hard. Yeah.
So you've done quite a few presentations in your day through your university training and afterwards. I know that you've done some presentations in Ireland at the University of Glasgow, the Celts in America Conference at St X in 2011, the Harvard Celtic Colloquium, and several guest lectures. Would you care to comment on one or two of those?
Well, sure. Well, I could maybe topically I could over the years. I've presented in lots of different aspects of Celtic studies, because Celtic studies is a broad field. As you know, it encompasses the study of the ancient Celtic peoples and their languages on the continent, all the way through the Middle Ages, studying medieval Gaelic from Ireland, largely from Ireland, but also from Scotland, and Middle Welsh in Wales, and then through to the six modern Celtic languages, and each is a sub-branch of Celtic studies, and there's specialists in each one of those, in Scotland, Ireland, the Isle of Man, and Wales, Cornwall, and Brittany. So each one has its own language and literature and folklore and traditions and histories. So it's a huge field. So my area of specialization from my PhD days would be mostly in the Scottish end of Celtic studies, and my PhD was really interested in looking at the Scottish Gaelic community of the Maritimes, and especially looking at Alexander MacLean Sinclair's role in that community, and especially as a publisher, his role in teaching Celtic studies here at St X, and how significant he was in kind of trying to get down this transition from the oral to the literary tradition in Gaelic. And as the grandson of the well-known Bard MacLean, he had inherited a couple of important manuscripts. So over the years, my presentations at conferences largely revolved around talking about some aspect or other of the Gaelic community of Nova Scotia historically, and in literature. But I've also presented papers on other things, especially when I was still a graduate student at St X, at Harvard. I would there were papers that I would do on medieval Welsh tradition and some other things, but it mostly has to do with Scottish Gaelic community in Nova Scotia.
Yeah, that would give you a very broad understanding of all the Celtic languages.
Yes,
right?
Yes. And that's what we teach, some aspects of those in our program, our undergraduate program, and our master's program here at St X. We've got courses in Celtic civilization and medieval Celtic literature, but we've got courses obviously in modern Scottish Gaelic at three levels, and Scottish history and Scottish folklore and Irish folklore. And the outgrowth of the Scottish Gaels from Scotland to the New World, and especially emphasizing it here in Nova Scotia. So, yeah.
What about the country called Galicia? There's rumor that we're strongly connected to Galicia.
Well,
yes.
In very ancient times, Galicia in Spain, is that what you're talking about? Yeah, it's the kind of north west corner of Spain. Well, they don't have a Celtic language, but in kind of the new musical movement, especially in Pan-Celtic, Pan-Celticism, if you will, just the Galicia or Galicia, as they say there, kind of want to be part of, consider themselves to be part of the greater Pan-Celtic identification. But from an academic perspective, the connections are really, for us, have to be in language. So I don't see really how Galicia or Galicia is part of. It's not really part of Celtic studies, because there is no Celtic language there, not since ancient times, since Roman times, really.
Well, I suppose discoveries could still be made, I suppose, if someone else went deeper researching into that. Who knows?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting avenue. There's certainly archaeological evidence from connecting to the earlier Celts there, but there has been no continuous Celtic language there.
Okay, thank you. So you've done quite a bit of research and writing as well about the Gaels in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Can you comment on that?
I have a little bit already with regards to Alexander MacLean Sinclair, and he was a minister brought up in Antigonish County, actually, just this side of the Pictou Antigonish County line. He grew up in the household of the Bard Maclean, who was his grandfather. His mother was Christy Maclean, who was born in the Isle of Tiree. And the Bard had immigrated with his family, and so he's brought up in that household, a very strong family associated with poetry, as his grandfather, was Báist here na Hulla in Scotland. So he was one of the last poets in Scotland to have that traditional epithet, that traditional nickname. And so that was very much part of the family history and the pride that the family had, I think, in that aspect of Gaelic culture. And so Maclean Sinclair was very much brought up with cognizant of the fact that his family were steeped in Gaelic culture.
And he felt compelled,
I think he did.
To record that.
He did. He did, especially his connection with the Macleans. Because he took the middle name Maclean after his mother's side, and the two manuscripts that his grandfather brought over with him, he felt very, very much compelled to eventually publish those. But his church upbringing was obviously very strong. He became a minister, but his minister growing up was the Reverend Duncan Black Blair, who represented a very strong example, I think, of an educated man, Gaelic speaker, who was a Gaelic publisher and well known in his own right as even a poet. So the D.B. Blair was very influential on him. He actually was responsible for marrying him, and also when he was becoming a minister, he kind of was involved with testing him.
And there was another group you were involved in. I think it's called the Brock Research Collective.
The Brock Collective here at St. X, yes. Well, that was a group of scholars from different disciplines here at St. X who were interested in aspects of death and dying traditions surrounding the Scottish community in Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island, but mostly Scotland, mostly Nova Scotia. So that was really put together largely by Dr. Laurie Stanley Blackwell in the history department. She was really the person who established that. And so that's kind of worked into a project that Laurie and I have worked on, led to a SHIRC grant. That's the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, for which Laurie was awarded a nice bit of money, some funds to help get research started on that, and I was a secondary researcher that was part of that grant. So Laurie and I have presented a few papers at conferences regarding that, mostly at this stage looking at cemeteries and tombstones and inscriptions on tombstones from people of Scottish descent. And one of those papers and projects that we're working on had to do with Gaelic on tombstones. So that was a very interesting project. It's ongoing. So so there's more work to do on that, and we'll be publishing those in a few different venues soon.
Good. I'll have to watch for those.
That's what my most recent bit of research is involved.
And I'd like to ask you now about the book you've written and other publications that you're working on. So
Okay.
Can you comment on those, please?
Sure. I think the book you're referring to is called Fógraigh Fashnach Filiach, Parting Prophecy Poetry, that I did with John Alec McPherson, or Sean Alec McPherson, as he's known in Gaelic, his mother tongue. It was a lot of fun to work on that project with John Alec, and who just passed away, unfortunately. And that was a work that was essentially an edition and translation of the writings of the Reverend Duncan Black Blair, who published a lot of his materials in Mactala, the famous newspaper published in Sydney in the late 1800s and early 1900s. But it was this was the minister who was the minister of Reverend Alexander MacLean Sinclair when he was growing up. So he was a big influence on him, as I mentioned. He published extensively. So, and he was a well-known poet, so he included a number of his poems in that work as well. Other publications mostly have to do with articles. There's my PhD thesis, which is Dual Dha Sin.
And that means Dual Dha Sin?
Oh, that was his. That was his birthright. So, pardon me. Yes, but Dual Dha Sin, that was his birthright. That's has to do with Reverend Alexander MacLean Sinclair as a Gaelic scholar and Celtic scholar in general as well, and publisher and teacher, etc. So that's going to be turned into a book someday. But other publications would include articles that have been published on an aspect of the Gaelic community of PEI, various aspects of Alexander MacLean Sinclair's scholarship, his publishing activities, the editing activities. As I said, he published a lot of Gaelic poetry. That was his grandfather's, based on manuscripts, but he had a reputation for altering his texts, because he himself said that he would rather burn every poem in his collection than publish something that could possibly cause offense. So what that means is that we really can't take his poetical publications as authoritative, because we know he changed some aspects of the poetry to fit meter in a way that he thought was correct, or maybe even some factual information to his own ideas about what was correct in terms of Scottish history. And so he's meddled with the text a little bit here and there, or maybe even a lot. But so we have to go back to the originals, or as early as we can find them. But at any rate, the material is still very important as some of the earliest publications of this stuff. So he's a very interesting fellow. So. Yeah.
And if anyone is interested, there's a list of your publications on the St. website, the Celtic Department website.
Mm-hmm.
Where you have a page.
Yes, I have a yes. I have to keep it updated, but yes, there's a number of listed there. Yeah.
And of course, you've written articles for the local newspaper. I know the Casket, the International newspaper,
Yes, there were a few there was part of the Gaelic little Gaelic column that was published there over a few years, and so I have a few little blurbs in there of things that I've gathered myself from mostly from my archival work, but yeah.
Is there one that stands out in your mind right now?
Oh, there was a funny story that I actually enjoy telling my students too, because it involved when a famous English scholar was going around the Highlands looking for manuscripts of Gaelic. This was all in the wake of the Ossianic controversy, and so he didn't believe that Macpherson really had Gaelic manuscripts, so he wanted to find them. And so he and his companion Boswell were journeying around the western part of Scotland and the islands to look for this material. And Johnson was famous for publishing the first dictionary in the English language. So that was one of the things. He was a literary critic, and so he was landed on one of the islands. And this is a story that I found in the family history of the Sinclair family. And when I was researching Alexander MacLean Sinclair, and it's a little joke really. As Johnson was landing, there was an old man said to another. He said, because they were making a bit of a big deal of him, he was walking around and a bit of a fuss being made, and he said, "Who's that fella?" and the other guy said, "Well, Shinnin Dunya Ranya Vyarla. That's the man who made the English language." And the man said back, he said, "Well, Spekavekadiano." So he didn't have to do much, in other words. So I always thought that was a cute story. Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
So you've done quite a bit of community service too, and by working with the St. Gaelic Day, or the Gaelic Council of Nova Scotia, and the Atlantic Gaelic Academy. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. The Atlantic Gaelic Academy, I was more involved with them from about 2000, I would say. 2006, 2007. And I taught for them for 3 years in the Glasgow area. So I used to travel down there once a week and had a nice group of students, mature students. And so it was actually quite pleasurable, and got to know a number of the people who were involved with Gaelic even since then. And Wendy with Isaac and Robert Forsyth and Joan MacDonald and a number of other people that are still involved with as Gaelic learners. And so that was a lot of fun. And
there was a Gaelic development steering group you're part of. Right?
Yeah, that was quite a few years ago now. But that was something that you're involved with trying to determine. This was even before the Gaelic Affairs Office was made, and they were going around doing consultation meetings with members of the community, and there were several meetings that we had to go to. That was I think the Gaelic Development Steering Group, and trying to guide some of that. I had just moved back here from Boston at the time, and so that was already kind of on the go. So I kind of came into that in the middle of things. But
okay, and I know of one other one that I'm a part of as well, is the Celtic Travel Bursary Endowment Fund.
Yes.
So
yes,
that's a good.
Well, right around the time that the chair of the MacDonald Chair in Celtic Studies was established, Father Vern Boudelier helped get established this Celtic Travel Bursary, with largely from donations from people around Nova Scotia, etc. And it was to send essentially any Nova Scotia student to not necessarily just at St. X, but any Nova Scotia student interested in going to one of the Celtic countries, any of the 6 Celtic countries, to pursue some aspect of the culture, whether it had to do with language. Of course, that was emphasized, language, but maybe they're just interested in doing some research on some aspect of their culture or history, or taking part in cultural events such as musical events or what have you. It could be going to, in some instances, we've helped sponsor pipers to go to the World Pipe Band Championships, or other things like that, fiddle festivals, people interested in Gaelic sport. We recently gave a grant to someone who was interested in studying Gaelic football and other sports in Ireland.
So the fund assists with their travel arrangements?
The fund helps with their travel arrangements, yes. It's not a huge amount, but it's a nice,
it's a big help.
It is a big help, yeah. So I'm on the board of that. So there's a number of people on the board. I don't want to start listing names in case I forget some names.
But it's it's organized since a number of years now, so they've given out quite a number of persons since they started.
That's right. I think it was in 2000, and I've only really been part of the committee since I became chair of the Celtic Studies department in I think 2011, and before that it was Ken Nilsson who was on it as chair of the Celtic Studies department.
So now I'd like to move on to some samples of your Gaelic expression. Do you have any favourite Gaelic words or expressions?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. It's hard to think of some on the spot, but I like certain ones that make that are fun to say. Even words like, it's a stupid little word like shedavet, which just means towel, but or serviette. It just feels nice to say it. Yeah. But it rolls off the tongue a little bit, but it's fun to say. But there's some fun expressions that I have. Yes. Sometimes they're not the nicest of expressions, but they're funny. Yeah. One that I remember learning, I think when I was a student at St. X, it's not very politically correct, but it's a nice it's a fun thing to say because it rhymes. It's Fadan be bo be bens, Fadan be ben be buarig. Do you know that one?
Oh, I do.
Fadan be bo be bens, Fadan be ben be buarig. So where there's cows, there's women, and where there's women, there's temptation. But it was attributed to Saint Columba on the Isle of Iona, and why he didn't allow cows to be on Iona. I'm not sure the actual age of it, but it's attributed to Saint Columba, and it's fun to say because of the bees in it.
It almost sounds like the vocables in the game.
Yeah, almost, yeah. And I have a few favorite Shanachlan, proverbs and sayings. So there's one I like. It's kind of funny. It's Feda Lushkis Ahan Shehain Ayemasuyer. I always thought that was funny. He who burns his own butt must sit on it, essentially, is what that is. Yeah.
Learn a lesson.
Yes. In other words, you made your mess.
Yes.
Now you have to fix it. You made your bed. No, you have to. Now you have to lie in it. That kind of thing. Yeah.
Same idea.
Yeah. So.
Did you ever hear this one? Casafal, Casafulak.
No.
It's the one I learned from Sister Margaret.
Yes.
And it means one for the head and the other back. It's referring to someone that's very undecided.
Aha.
Can't make up his mind.
Yes. That would be me, actually.
You've made quite a number of trips to Scotland and to other Celtic countries.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. I don't actually know how many times I've been to Scotland now. I've been to so many. Actually, in the past 2 years, I was there about 6 times for conferences relating to some of the work that I've been doing with Dr. Laurie Stanley Blackwell. But I've been over several times to study Gaelic and do research. I made a trip in, I think it was 2009, to do some research in Edinburgh and Glasgow, but also made a trip to the Isle of Tiree and to interview and do some recordings of some people there, just to hear how the Gaelic is in Tiree. And actually the Gaelic scholar Donald Meek happened to be there. That's where he's from originally, as a house there. His first family came from, which is not very far from where the Bard Maclean's people came from, the same end of the island. So he was very kind to take me in and have a nice conversation over tea and act as the informant, with my recorder going and taking me around that end of the island and showing me, this is where they say that the Bard Maclean had his house was, for instance. So that was a great trip, and I got to see where the people I've been working on in such depth for so many years actually came from. Yeah. Okay, so I'm talking about countries, Celtic countries and things that I've been to. And so in addition to Scotland, I've been to each one of the 6 Celtic countries. So besides Scotland, I was to Ireland and the Isle of Man and Wales and Cornwall and Brittany, even if it was just for a day or two. While I was a student at Harvard, we were able to get summer grants to go do some research in archives or summer language research. So I studied Irish Gaelic in Ireland one summer, and that one summer I actually took a ferry from Belfast to the Isle of Man, and it was there for 2 nights, and sat in on a Manx Gaelic class in the Manx National Museum. That was a lot of fun, actually. It was really interesting and I toured around the island. From there, I went to Wales, spent a couple of nights there in Wales, and took a train down to Cornwall. One night in Cornwall and in the area of Penzance, and that was interesting. I have ancestry from Cornwall as well. I had a great-great-grandmother who was a Boundy was her last name, and actually the house that's still in my family that my grandfather, that was my grandfather's house, it was built by that Cornish family that I'm descended from. So it was interesting to visit Cornwall. Yeah. There's a strong West Country settlement in Prince Edward Island that I'm descended from a couple of branches in my family, so the Devon and Cornwall area. And then I took the ferry over to France and toured around Brittany a little bit and went to Brest and Quimper. And Quimper was a beautiful medieval city, and tried to talk with a number of the people about Breton culture as much as I could in the short time that I was there. But that was very interesting. It was the Bretons were very interested in, I think, in a way like we were talking about the Galicians interested in Pan-Celticism. I found that in Brittany, at least amongst the people that I spoke to, seemed to have a big interest in kind of the Pan-Celtic identity in a way that's not quite as prevalent among people that I found in Wales or Ireland and Scotland. It was just as an interesting kind of observation. Plus, the Bretons have really adopted the Scottish Highland bagpipes as part of and kind of made them their own thing. They have pipe bands, they're called bagads, and they have incorporated their own instruments into those pipe bands. So they're actually spectacular. Their own music and and when you combine these instruments and play their own style of music with the Highland bagpipes, they're spectacular. They're really, really, from my perspective, it's new and refreshing in a way. Yeah. And then I went from there back to Britain and then up into Scotland and spent some time with some friends there. So that one summer I was able to visit all 6 Celtic countries, which was a really fascinating trip for me. But since then I've been to other countries like Greece several times. And actually, as a matter of fact, just this summer I did a 3-week immersion course in Greek. And so from a language teacher's perspective, it was interesting to see how modern Greek is taught. There's they do it in a both an immersive way, but also, they're not avoiding the grammar. They're teaching the grammar at the same time as trying to put you in an environment where you use everyday language. So it's a nice combination, I thought. And there's some interesting similarities I found between modern Greek and Scottish Gaelic, actually. So, for instance, we've got the DH and GH sound in Scottish Gaelic, which can make a sound, or it can make a y sound, like a Y sound, if it's next to what we would call a slender vowel or a palatal vowel. In modern Greek, they do the same thing. The letter gamma, which in modern Greek is actually pronounced gamma. They actually have the same phoneme that we have in Scottish Gaelic and Irish Gaelic. And that's the way it's pronounced. And so in the name like George in modern Greek it's like a G-E, so they have like the gamma next to what we would call a slender vowel, a palatal vowel, and it makes it a Y sound. So it becomes yorgos. So those are sounds for someone who studied one of the Gaelic languages. It's actually not that difficult to pronounce because they have all similar phonemes.
I heard like a guttural sound in the second syllable.
It's the same sound that we have in Gaelic. It's the ra, for instance. So it's yorgos. So for me that was fascinating to say, oh, this isn't difficult. Mind you, the grammar is another story altogether. That's quite different, but phonetically there's some really interesting similarities. And then in the folk culture of Greece too, there's some interesting folk culture items that are not dissimilar to.
So Manx Gaelic seems to be quite strong compared to other Gaelic languages like Irish and other
strong
languages. It seems to have gained a lot of strength the last number of years.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Well, Manx died out actually in the 1970s. With Ned Madrell, but they have people who learned from the last of the native speakers in the Isle of Man, and they had recordings. The Irish Folklore Society sent over a van load of recording equipment in the earlier part of the 1900s. So they recorded native Manx Gaelic speakers, and so they have that as a resource to learn from as well. So they've got that wealth of material there. So there's an argument there for that, so that the language didn't really die out. So, but yeah, they have quite a movement there of teaching in schools, and there's quite a revival there. I think that we can maybe learn from in Nova Scotia, or at least comparatively. Yeah.
I think I just read recently where they're opening a Manx Gaelic medium school.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So that's quite a step forward.
Yes. Yes.
So now I'd like to ask you, Michael, what changes you have seen over the years since you've become involved in Gaelic language and culture?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You can start with the history of Gaelic in Nova Scotia, the Kennedy report that came out in 2001,
yeah.
the style of melancholics, anything you choose. There's been some ups and downs.
Yes.
I'd like to hear your
There have been some ups and downs, but I think the general trend seems to be up to me. Maybe I'm seeing the glass half full, but it's I think the developments in Gaelic in Nova Scotia have been rather exciting over the past almost 20 years now, and I think that's in large part from a lot of the work that's been done since about 2000 with getting the community-based meetings to assess what the community would like to see from the government's perspective, and when Rodney MacDonald was premier, to get the Office of Gaelic Affairs established under his government was absolutely astounding to me. I never thought I'd actually see. Maybe I was being more negative then, but I never thought I'd see something like that in Nova Scotia. So I'm happy to see that it's still going, and hopefully it will continue. But I think that has been important to add visibility and to have a kind of central body in a way around which the Gaelic community can focus in developments of the Gaelic Council as well, and the importance as a community organization to help support. And
it's encouraging to see some young couples bringing up their children to speak Gaelic.
Yes, and I think that the numbers in the last census show a growth in the numbers. Yeah, so we have new native speakers. Yeah, no, all that is very wonderful, and it's fun to be able to talk about that in class rather than talk about negative things. Yeah.
So what future do you see for Gaelic language and culture in Nova Scotia?
Well, again, I think you can focus on the negatives, or you can focus on the positives. And I think it's healthier maybe just to focus on the positives, and hopefully what we're seeing is a trend upwards. Mm-hmm. It's a shame that we're losing our native speakers as they get older, but it's refreshing that we see younger people so into the language that they're, and the music of course has always been like the core of around which people can focus and bring people to the language. So many people who became interested in the language because they're interested in the music. Yeah, well, I'd probably include myself in that latter category because I was interested in music, and that's what brought me to the language. Yeah. So that's a definite bonus is looking at the music and this important aspect of this. But I think that it'd be nice to see the language, the numbers increase. It'd be nice to see, and certainly more young kids taking it in school than ever.
You think we'll see a Gaelic medium school in Nova Scotia?
That would be really nice to see. Right,
or?
Like the École Pomquet that they have done is an example. There's the Acadian school just down the road in Pomquet Village. It would be nice to see a Gaelic medium school somewhere, perhaps in Mabu or wherever. Would it be wonderful to see that? Yeah. I think it's things that before you didn't think would be possible just seem possible now. Yeah, so I think that's very encouraging.
Good. And do you have some advice for Gaelic learners of any age?
I think be patient. Just to stick with it. Language learning is hard. Anytime you learn any language, if you want to learn it to be fluent, it takes a lot of patience and takes a lot of work. It's not something that you can just pick up.
It's like playing an instrument.
It's like playing an instrument.
You can't play it without if you leave it aside, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So I guess patience is the only thing.
The tuning in the ear is important.
True. Yeah, both in learning an instrument and when you're learning a language, you have to work on that. But that's something you work on pronunciation wise. The more you're surrounded by people and take advantage of certain resources that are available to you and online or wherever.
So, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to add before we end the interview today?
No, I'm just thank you very much. But it's nice to see you're doing a project. I suppose going around and interviewing various people involved with Gaelic work over the years. So good for you.
Well, thank you, and I'd like to thank you also on behalf of the Gaelic College for taking part in this interview. And I'm sure it'll be interesting and valuable to people for years to come. And I want to thank you again. More than thank.
Colaisde.